decimals, and we're actually going to use what we did yesterday for this lesson. So you know that happens a lot, where the next lesson we always go back and use the tools that we learned yesterday. So we're going to be doing some rounding and then some adding and subtracting. So we're going to be adding and subtracting today, so it's not too bad.
That's easy.
So we are on chapter 5, lesson 2. Here's the thing though. If yesterday, when we were estimating, you had a hard time, today's your day to make sure that you fully understand how to do that. Because if you're rounding to the wrong place, like let's say when we just graded our math from yesterday, if you missed a whole bunch of questions, then today, once we get started, I want you to, you're gonna have to be responsible. And after you do a few questions, I want you to raise your hand and let me see it. Okay? And that way I can make sure that you're doing it right. Did you find it? Okay. Thank you.
It was in my
Okay. All right. So because we're rounding and then finding an answer, if you round incorrectly, your answer will then be incorrect. So if you had a hard time with rounding yesterday, make sure that you ask, once we pay really close attention while we're taking some notes, because I'm going to be showing you some more rounding again. But then once we get to the assignment, if you had a hard time with rounding, after you do a few, then let me come and look at it and make sure you're doing it right before you move on and do the whole thing. You wouldn't want to do the whole thing and then have to go all the way back and start over, right? So just do a few at a time and then let me look at it if you had a hard time yesterday. Okay? So this time, our essential question is how you can use place value and properties to add and subtract decimals. So this is how, remember how I told you yesterday that if you go shopping at the store and you only have so much money to spend and you want to make sure you don't go over that amount, then rounding is what you would do with all of the prices of all the items you want to buy. You're going to round those, and then you would have to add them up. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. And the other thing is, maybe you have to go to another store after, and you want to make sure you have at least $5 left to go to this other store because there's something there that you need to buy. So you might use subtraction, right? You might add up all the things and then say, well, I have $20. So if I subtract about how much I would have spent, let's see if I'll have at least $5 left. Okay, so the scenario that I gave you yesterday with going shopping also applies to this one too. All right. So this is just one of those tools. Go ahead. So if you have a whiteboard, here's the problem of the day. I'm going to read it. You can look at it while I'm reading. If you don't have a whiteboard, just use your notes. Okay. Or you might have just another piece of paper you're going to write on. If you don't have a whiteboard marker, just use your notes. Just use a little corner of your notes.
This looks like a whiteboard.
Oh. You're not going to add. Let me read it. Got a lot of sharpening of pencils. You're going to write 3 numbers that are between 1 and 1500ths and 1 and 1600ths that equals 1 and 1500 when you, let's not restart, when you round it to the nearest hundredth. There was a question, did you guys remember the question that was like this in your homework last night? So it said to write 2 numbers that would round to, I think it was like 1 and 8/10 or something like that. So it's kind of the same idea. So you're going to have 3 numbers, and they have to be between 1 and 1500ths, like let's say this was the number line, and 1 and 1600ths. So it's got to round to 1 and 1500ths when you round it to the nearest hundredth. So here's what your number is going to have to go to the thousandths place, right? Because if I round to the hundredths, that means I'm going to look to the right to the thousandths place to see what I do with that number. Okay, so think of a couple of numbers, see if it works, and then you'll hopefully see the pattern, and then we'll go over it. So take a second to see if you can figure it out. This is my example. So if I round that number to the nearest hundredths, what would the answer be? If I round 1 and 157 thousandths, if I round it to the hundredths place, what number am I going to get? So here's the hundredths place. Hold on, here's the hundredth. That you're rounding to the nearest whole number, I think. So if I look to the right, that means this number would be bumped up and everything after it disappears, right? So then I would get 1 and 1600ths. Too much, right? Because I need to get 1 and 1500ths. So now I want you to think again on what you think I'm going to have to do. Like, what do I have to change about that example to make it equal what I need it to equal, which is 1 and 15/100ths. So I gave you that example because I wanted you to hopefully see what I would need to change there. So look one more time. Who thinks they have one that would work? Catherine, what do you think?
1.152.
So 1 and 152/100ths. Here's the hundredths place. If I look to the right, I would round this number. Oh, sorry, thousandths. Thank you. So if I round this number to the hundredths place, look to the right, I would get 1 and 15/100ths. So that's a good answer. What's another one? There's more than one right answer here. Hamza, what do you think? 1 and 153/1000ths. So if I look to the right, I would get 1 and 15/100ths again. What else? Concrete? 1 and 150 what? 54/1000ths. If I underline this and I look to the right, I would get 1 and 15/100ths. What if the thousandths place was a 1? That would work?
Yeah.
If the thousandths place was a 0, that would work. Oh, you could do 1 and you could do 101. No, you couldn't. Because it's
in between.
yeah, it's got to be a number that has to be yeah. So that means it wouldn't have a number in the thousandths place after the 6. So yeah, good thinking, but that one wouldn't work. It wouldn't follow the rules there that they're giving you. So as long as the number in the thousandths place is 4 or less, the 5 would stay a 5. Anytime you bump up the thousandths place to something bigger than a 5 or more, then the hundredths place would have to be bumped up. All right, let's look at the next one. This was just one example to make sure you got that place value. Here's our notes. So I need you to write chapter 5, lesson 2, and then the title of the lesson is let me make sure I get the title right. Estimate sums and differences. So the question that they give us here at the top says, how would you prove that there is more than one way to estimate sums and differences? So I'm going to show you a couple of different ways. Here's our first example. So I have to write some directions up here because I'm going to show you a couple of different directions, because your assignment today will also show you a couple of different directions, and it's going to look just the same as this. So this way you can really use your notes to help you out today. So this will say round to the nearest 1. And then there's a comma because there's more directions. Then add or subtract. Does anybody remember from yesterday? If I didn't want to say round to the nearest 1, what else could I say? Concrete, what else could I say? You could say round to the nearest whole number, and that would also be something that you could say. Julissa, can you come and sit at this group? This is the one I asked you to sit at. That over the table is way too squishy, and you're not writing any notes. So sit over here. This is where I asked you to sit. If you don't want to sit on a blue cushion, you can just move the cushion off. So, as I told you before we started, when we were on the title screen there, what we're going to be doing today is rounding first, and they're going to tell you the place to round it to, and then we're either going to add the numbers together or we're going to subtract the numbers. So here's our first example. 4 and 204/1000ths plus 2 and 779/1000ths. So there's our two numbers. Now, later in this chapter, we are going to add decimals. So you're going to be able to find out the exact answer to this. But for today, we're just finding an estimate. We're just finding an estimate. Oh, what happened? Look it. You can see my screen. Oh, there it is. It was a glitch. It was just taking a long. I had it on mine, but it was not up there for some reason. So what number is the whole number here in the first number? Nolan, what is it? 4. What about the second number? 2. Hi. That's okay. All right, so since those are our two, because it says whole number, that's why we knew to underline those digits, right? So now I'm going to look to the right, and then we're going to make a whole number. It's, something's happening here. It's a little slow. That's okay. I know, that's okay. It'll work itself out. So because the number that I'm pointing to, if you forgot what we did yesterday, you could always use your notes from yesterday. Just flip back a page. So basically what we have to do today is we have to divide, sorry, not divide, we are adding. We have to round both of those numbers and then we have to add them. So because it says that we need a whole number or the nearest ones, we do that first and then we add. So that means that our answer should be a whole number or to the ones place. So as soon as I do this, it's going to look super easy to you. So watch. Since I underline the 4, I look to the right, and because that number is 4 or less, the 4 stays a 4.
And then
that's what we did yesterday. The difference is we're going to do that twice, and then we're either going to add or subtract the numbers. So because this number is a 2 that I underlined in the ones place, and then I look to the right, and that's a 7, then Sean, what happens to the 2?
The 2 will become a 3 because 9 is closer to 3 than it is to 2, so
that is right.
Then
so
if you add 4 and 3, you would get 7 as your final answer.
Right. So because 7, what he was saying, because 779 is closer to 3, makes that number closer to 3 if you were thinking of a number line, then that would round to 3. We can also tell because when we look to the right, the number that the arrow is pointing to is 5 or more, so we would up the score, which means that our whole number changes from a 2 into a 3. Then we add them together. Let's erase that and start again. I think, so the answer there was 7 because we had a 4 and we had a 3 and we added them together.
So we only add the ones that they add. So if
We're,
they add them to around 100, we only add
Can you do an example?
yep.
Okay.
Let's do another example.
If they ask us to round the hundreds, then we only add the hundreds.
We are only, so, nope.
We said to add the ones, so we just added the ones. But if they ask to add the hundreds,
If they ask you to round to the hundredths place,
then we add they want you to round them.
today, because we haven't learned how to add decimals yet, that hasn't been a lesson yet. So because of that, in today's lesson, you're either going to round to the nearest ones place, or you're going to round to the nearest tens, not th, just 10. So we're looking at our numbers are going to be whole numbers today. It's either going to be a number to the tens place or a number to the ones place, and we're going to get rid of all the decimals today. So for today, we're not adding any decimals or subtracting any decimals. It's all going to be whole numbers. So watch this one. If I round this number to the nearest ones, would look like that, and this number, right? And when I look to the right, so that would make 18 and 93 hundredths round to what, Malachi? 19. Because the 9 is 5 or more, so that means that the 8 would be upped from 8 to 9. And then we're going to subtract from that this number after we round it. And so since I'm underlining the 5, Angelina, do you know what would happen to the 5 since I look to the right and it's a 3?
It would stay at 5 and then the 3 would become a 0.
Yep, so it stays a 5 and then everything after the decimal just disappears. So 19 minus 5 is 14.
Oh, so
Okay.
we're never going to have a decimal in this.
On this lesson today, you will never have a decimal answer. You will, because
Simple enough.
here's why, because if they ask you to round to the hundredths or the tenths, then you'd have to add or subtract them, and we haven't learned how to do that yet. So later you might have that, but not today. Here's one with a different set of directions. And the reason why I want you to write this is because this is exactly what your lesson, what your assignment is gonna, let's not forget the letter there. This is exactly the same directions that your assignment is going to have today. So if you get confused during the assignment, like let's say you're working and you see a new set of directions and you kind of get confused, like the nearest tens, what do I do? Then you can look over into your notes and find where we wrote this. We have the same exact directions, and then you can see what the examples are that we're going to do here in just a second. Okay? So here's our first one. 33 and 8/100ths plus 19 and 61/100ths.
Can you try this one on your own?
Not yet. I will give you one to try on your own in just a second. Yeah, new direction, so let's do it together. So anybody know on that first number, 33 and 8/100ths, what number is in the tens place? I said that slowly. Tens place. Malachi, what number?
0.
That's the 10th.
Oh, the 3.
The 3, the first 3. So in today's lesson, you are either rounding to the ones, which is the number right before the decimal, or the tens, which is the number that's 2 spaces before the decimal. So we're not rounding anything after the decimal point this time.
Got it.
So what about this one? Yeah, you could do that. You could write that. So what would 33 and 8/100ths round to? What would 33 and 8/100ths round to? Nolan.
33 and 33 and 8/100ths would round to 30, and 19 and 61/100ths would be 20.
Oh, he's right. So here's why. Here's why.
Tens.
We're rounding to the tens. Right, so here's the decimal. So the numbers between that number and the decimal have to become a 0. And then everything after the 0 can disappear. So then my final answer is 50. Think of a number line. 33, is that closer? Because if I'm rounding to the tens, that means my answer is either going to be 30 or 40.
30, because it's closer to the
And 33 is closer to 30 than it is to 40, so that would round to 30. And the other number, 19 and 61/100ths. So my 2 answer choices would be either 10 or 20. And so 19 is definitely closer to 20, which is why I rounded up.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you think, you can think about it like that too. If you just, maybe you're not even paying attention to this part of the number, because in this case it doesn't really matter, does it? Today's lesson, whatever you have after the decimal point doesn't really matter. It's going to disappear anyway, because we're not looking at those numbers to help us round. We're only looking at the tens or the ones. Try this one by yourself.
It really does make sense. Still would be easy.
Here's your direction. Round to the nearest tens.
Tens.
The nearest tens. I'll write it up there. The nearest tens. So round to the nearest tens and then subtract. We're rounding to the nearest tens and then subtract. So the tens place would be here and here. If I look to the right, remember I said you're not even really paying attention to these numbers. So I'm basically rounding 47, which would round up to 50. Faith, can you come and move and sit over here? I need to keep an eye on you. You're talking to a different person today during math. Come move. You need to move. Come on. I need to be able to see what you're doing and that you're taking notes and allowing everybody else who's sitting near you be able to hear the lesson too. Then if I subtract, I'm going to subtract how much? What am I rounding 11 to? What, Malachi? 10. Right? So he's thinking of a number line way, and that's a good way to do it too. So 11 is going to be closer to 10 than it is to 20. And if we're rounding to the tens place, that's what it is. So then I would get 40 as my answer. I'm going to ask you to do the same one, but I'm going to ask you to round to the nearest ones. So same number. Same number. I'm going to rewrite it down here so that you can see it. But I want you to do the same number, but this time I want you to round to the ones place.
Ones and minus?
You could still subtract, yes. So this time to the ones place. Yes, because I'm rounding, Aiden had a good point. Because I'm rounding to the ones place, I actually need, I need the first digit there, right? If I'm rounding to the tens, I never am going to need the numbers after the decimal. But because I'm rounding to the ones, I do need to look past the decimal to the right. So my 47 and 8/10 would bump to what? 48.
Yes.
And what would my 11 and 300ths? What would happen, Karnpreet? Oh, 11 would stay 11 because it's, remember, you give it a rest. You give it a rest. Remember? So then you get 37 as your final answer this time.
Oh,
Because you made it 10. All right, look at your math examples. Example number 1. Let's take 5 seconds for you to be able to look at number 1. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. See if we can get through this without this glitching anymore. We'll see. It needs to be restarted. It told me it needs some updates. It needs to be restarted. Maybe that's why. We'll see. So Hasada used a digital thermometer to find the morning temperature and afternoon temperature. She found the morning temperature was 31 and 3/10 degrees Fahrenheit, and the afternoon was 37 and 6/10 degrees Fahrenheit. Estimate the difference in average temperatures. Notice that for this question, they didn't tell us if they wanted the 10s or the 1s. So they're giving you two chances to do that, just like what I did in that last example. So if you want to round to the nearest 10, you would underline the 3 in both of those. Look to the right. And in this case, the 37 would change to a 40. And the 31 would be a 30. So if we subtract that, we would get 10. Sorry, it's glitching. Hopefully you wrote that down. There we go. Now, if we rounded to the nearest 1s, we would underline the 7 on the first number and the 1 on the second number. And then we would look to the right, and we would have 38, right? Because 6 is more than 5, 5 or more. It means the 7 bumps to an 8. And then if I look to the right here, because 3 is 4 or less, that would give the 31 a rest, and you'd have 31 there. So it's 38 minus 31, which would give us about 7. And the difference would be 7. So the difference would be about 10 degrees, or it'll come back, or 7 degrees. So now they're telling you the answer. Do you see that sentence underneath what I just wrote?
Yes.
The actual difference is 6 and 3/10 Fahrenheit. So which way gives you the more accurate difference? Which way do you think, Malachias? What do you think? When we rounded to the nearest 1, do you see how that's a closer answer because we got 7 rather than 10? So, I'm waiting for listeners. I don't want to say this to myself. I'm saying it to a few people who are looking right at me. So he just said that rounding to the nearest 1s gave you a more accurate measurement. That's always going to be the case. If you round to the nearest 1, because when we round to the nearest 10, you can be like quite a few off. Remember how when we did rounding before and we said the more you change these numbers, the further away your estimate is from the actual answer? The last time when we did like estimate and then divide. So same thing goes here. When you round to the nearest 1s, you're always going to have a closer estimate. So unless they tell you to do the 10s, the closer estimate is going to be the 1s place. So we'll write that in, that the nearest 1s gave the most accurate estimate. I'll wait till it comes back up and then we'll switch it. There we go. Next example. Let's erase all that. So now we're going to estimate, and this time they told us to round to the nearest 1s. So I would underline the 5 and the 1, look to the right. So what would 5 and 2600ths round to, Malachi?
5.
Just 5. What about 1 and 9300ths? What would that round to, Nolan?
5 and...
Nope, he already did that one. Do the 1 and 90.
1 and 9300ths would be 2.
would round to 2. And it asked us to add them. Okay, watch this first and then he can show you, okay, in a second. So we're going to add 5 and 2 and we get 7. So the answer will be about 7. So if I were going to the store and I were buying 2 things, one cost $5.26 and the other cost $1.93, and I know I only have a $10 or something, I want to make sure I have enough money, then I could round those to the nearest dollar. Then that way I could easily add them in my head. So do you see how today's lesson has a little bit of mental math in it? Because the math portion that you're doing, like the adding and subtracting, should be able to be done in your head because we've left the decimals out of it. So now we're only looking at the whole numbers, either round to the tens or to the ones. Okay, so now I can tell that 526 would be about 5 and 193 would be about 2. So it would cost me about $7. So if I had 10, I'd have enough money. Okay, when you start on the guided practice here, I want you to do the guided practice questions. There's 2 of them today. And then I want you to double check it with your neighbor. Just like I said before we started, if you had a problem yesterday and you had a hard time with the rounding, maybe today you missed a lot when we corrected them. If that was you, then after you do 2 or 3, raise your hand and let me come and check them before you do the whole thing, okay? That way if you're making a little bit of a mistake, I can help you. Make sure you use your notes. There's 2 sets of directions here. One says round to the nearest ones, and one says to the nearest tens. So look really closely at those directions. Okay, so start on the guided practice. Once you finish that, you can start on independent practice.